Hey everyone, welcome back to Laura Talks. I know it's been a long time and thank you guys for being so patient with me. But I'm here to talk about how to play Burning Wheel. And that is a very broad topic, so I will not be going over every single rule. Instead, I'm just going to be going over the structure of a campaign and then the structure of the typical session. Again, this is not sponsored by Burning Wheel. It's not sponsored by Roll20, which I'm going to be mentioning a couple times throughout the video. And I have permission to talk about these products from them. Excuse me. Sorry about that. First, where do you find resources for this game? And the answer to that is burningwheel.com. There are 2 books that are available for this game. You only really need the first one. This is the main book. It has the 4 core races: human, elf, dwarf, and orc. It has the rules to walk you through character creation. I also have a video on character creation. It has all of the basic rules for like fight, duel of wits, etc. It has the rules for the weapons and stuff. If you can't afford both books, this is the book you should buy. The second book is called the Codex, and it's more of a supplement. It has a couple extra races, it has a couple extra magic systems, and it goes a little bit more in depth about all of the rules, like Artha, fight, duel of wits, etc. So this is really helpful for GMs, or even if the player wants to understand the mechanics of the game better. Sometimes they have a deal where you can buy both of the books together and it'll be cheaper. On their own, they're $35 each. I think I was able to buy them together for $60 because there was a sale. And I know that is still expensive, but I would suggest if each player can't buy their own book, which isn't necessary, pool your money together and get a copy of the book, and with the book you'll get a PDF that can be shared with the players. But please don't pirate the system because it is a smaller company and they really, it affects them more. Anyways, so that's where you get the resources. You also need a group to play with. There will be 1 GM and anywhere from 2 to 6 players. You could have a game with 1 player, but that would be kind of hard because there would be no one to help you with the roles. And some people think that 4 or 5 players is too much for the GM to handle, because it's more for them to keep track of. My group has 5 players, and I've ran a one-shot for a group of 5 players, and I personally didn't find a problem with a group that big, but it is an individual thing. So if you think that having 4 or 5 players will be too much, or even if you only have 2 or 3 friends to play with, that's totally fine. You'll still have a lot of fun. So my group always does a session 0 together, and I highly recommend this because you get a chance to talk about the GM's vision for the campaign. And it's not really their vision because you're going to be working together to achieve the goal of the campaign. And you should probably, during that session 0, you should say what the end goal of the campaign is, or there might not be one. And you should but you should know when you're going to end if there isn't a set in stone goal. If your campaign is to overthrow the king, that's a set in stone ending. But if you're just playing as some, like, villagers just living their life in a village, you should say, well, we're gonna do this for 6 months-ish. And then at that point, we'll check in and see if you guys are still having fun or not. The group should decide on that together if there isn't a set in stone end, if that makes sense. So yeah, you brainstorm a bit about the campaign together. Yes, the GM knows the, like, overall plot, but you shouldn't plan the plot out specifically for you shouldn't have a very detailed plan for the campaign and for every single session. It should be more of like a vague idea, because each player, and this is jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but each player is going to have a set of beliefs for their character, and those beliefs shape what happens in the session. The GM should not be dictating exactly what happens in every session. Burning Wheel is a lot more player-led and player-involved than D&D, which is part of the reason that I find it so fun. Back to Session 0, I highly suggest building your characters together. This gives a chance to ask questions in a group setting, and if one person has a question, it's very likely that other people will have that same question too. So rather than the GM getting 5 messages about the same topic, one person can ask, and then the GM can answer, and then it helps everyone to build your characters together. It also helps because everyone will know, like, what type of character they're playing. If you're doing the day in the life village campaign, you probably don't want a noble, and you probably don't want an orc. But if there's a player that's like, I really want to be a noble, or I really want to be an orc, they can bring that up during the Session 0 and talk about it with the group. It also gives everyone a chance to get familiar with the other players' characters. And then at the beginning of the first session or two, my group will do a complete introduction of everyone's characters. So each player will go through, say, I'm playing this character, I'm this race, these are my beliefs, these are my instincts, these are my traits, and for any die traits or call-ons, you should explain what they do. You should say what relationships you have and what reputations and affiliations you have. And my group does that typically the first and second session of each campaign, because that gives you a chance to know everyone's character and know kind of what their vibe is. It's kind of like saying the backstory for your character. The traits are what shaped your character as a person and like kind of what define them. Your beliefs are the goals that your character has. The instincts are how your character reacts to situations. Are they very careful and they always have their helmet on when they're patrolling? Do they have an instinct about always having enough food to eat? Those are important things to know. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so you introduce your characters, and then during each session, even after like the second session, at the beginning of the session, you should still go over beliefs, because your beliefs might have changed. If the player succeeded in a belief, and got a persona for it last session, they should change that belief. If a player no longer cares about a belief, they should change that belief. It tells the GM and the other characters what your character's priority is for that session. And the GM can start thinking, okay, they want to do research about this topic, so I need to think of an NPC to be the librarian, or I need to find something interesting that will happen as they do that. I need to know what that character will find out. So it lets the GM do a little bit of more specific planning and think about the details that will come up in play. And sometimes GMs will make spur-of-the-moment decisions about information. That's totally fine. That's not a problem. It happens in Burning Wheel. It happens in D&D. It happens in every single game. Players vocalizing their beliefs it's like a heads up of, I'm going to try to do these things. Typically, players will only have 3 beliefs. Sometimes they'll have a trait that gives them a specific belief about a specific topic, so they might have a 4th. I would suggest players don't have to use all 3 beliefs. I would suggest that they do, because it gives you more chances to earn Artha at the end of the session. And having Artha available is a good thing. So after you do beliefs, my GM will typically say, okay, this is where you were at the end of last session. What do you want to do now? Because each player will have their goals, and the other players can help with them with that. So one player might say, I want to do research about how to defeat the sorcerer. So they go to the library, and the GM will give them an obstacle. Now obstacles are different than difficulty. What does DC stand for? Difficulty. Obstacles are different than setting a DC. Kind of. I'm now realizing, never mind. That's a rabbit hole that we're not going to go down. For each test, the player will say, here is my intent. In the example I gave, the intent is to find information to help defeat the sorcerer. The GM will say, okay, here's an obstacle that says how hard that is. If they're in some random library, it might be pretty hard. It might be like obstacle 5 or 6. If they're in a library about magic at a magic academy, it might be obstacle 2 or 3. That's all information that the GM will compile and make a decision on. And for the skills, the book has like suggestions on what the obstacle should be. Let me find. I flipped to a page that had mostly elf obstacles. Okay. Elf skills. Let's see. Here's a normal one. Scavenging. Actually, let me find research since I was talking about research. Here we go. Research. Common knowledge would be obstacle 1. Interesting facts would be obstacle 2. And there is an entire list of obstacles all for research. And most of the skills have a similar list of obstacles, and if they don't, they tell you where to look. Like riding tells you, see the riding and mounted combat chapter for obstacles. What's the word? Social skills, like persuasion. Say, use the will of the person you're trying to persuade as the obstacle. So that's another reason why having this book available is really handy, because if you're not sure what the obstacle should be, you can look up the skill in the book and say, okay, based on this, this, and this, I think it's obstacle 5. As well as obstacle, the GM should set a penalty. I say should, but it's actually like a rule in the book that the GM will set a penalty for failure, and that should be known ahead of time. It's kind of discouraged for the player to back out once they know the penalty for failure, but depending on the severity, they can, and the situation, you can still back out of a test. But most of the time, the failure isn't that bad. Like for the research roll example, if you fail the roll, you don't get information about the sorcerer, or maybe you get wrong information as a penalty for failure. So let's say in this example, it's obstacle 5. And let's say the player has exponent 3 research. If you just rolled 3 dice on an odd 5 test, you would get a challenging test. And challenging is the difficulty of the roll. You could also get a difficult test or a routine test. And these tests are used for advancement purposes. I'll go more into advancement in a little bit. But for the test, for each test, for skills, you can compile a list of fields of related knowledge, or forks for shorthand abbreviation. And you can say, I think my history skill will help with research. And the GM will say, sure. So you get another dice. And you can go through your list of skills and you can suggest, I think this will be helpful for research. And the GM will say yes or no. And then other players can also help. Like if they also have the research skill, they can help with that. 99% of the time, you can almost always help with the exact same skill. I say almost always because there's almost always an exception. If you have an adjacent skill, like, I also have history, can I help with that? History helps research. So yes. So you compile your list of forks and help dice. And depending on the total number of dice is what difficulty of a roll you get. If the obstacle is more than the number of dice you have, it's challenging. If it's the same or slightly lower, it'll be difficult. And if it's much lower, it'll be routine. Now, I know that's kind of vague, but there's a table in the book that lists obstacle versus dice and what difficulty it ends up being. There's also the same table on the Roll20 character sheets, and also when you make a roll, it will tell you this was a routine test. If you're not using Roll20, if you're using a paper character sheet, which I don't know if you mentioned this, but you can also find that on their website, burnandwheel.com. I would suggest printing out the little table for reference because it is really handy to have. So as you go through the session and as you get these tests, you should mark them down and track them for advancement. Because after a certain number of tests, your skill exponent will go up. So for the exponent 3, you need 3 routine tests and 2 difficult, or 1 challenging. So you always need, when your exponent is lower than 5, you always need a certain number of routine tests, but you need difficult or challenging. So for exponent 3, if you have 3 routine and 2 difficult, it would go up to 4. Or if you have 3 routine and 1 challenging, it would go up to 4. And so skills will advance based on how often you use them. For the players that help, you don't use the total dice pool. You instead use your exponent. So if a character helped on the OB5 research test with their own research, and that was exponent 2, they get a challenging test because their exponent is lower than the obstacle. For forks and help dice, it's you get 1 dice unless... Okay. I'm trying to think about how to explain this so that it makes sense. If you are helping with a skill, you need exponent 5 or higher to provide 2 dice. If you have 4 or lower, you provide 1 help dice. Sorry about that. Okay. If you are forking in a skill, you need exponent 7 or higher to get 2 dice. Otherwise, you just get 1 dice. And that's important to remember because you might think, oh, I'm helping with exponent 2 research, I give 2 dice. No, you still give 1. Because otherwise, help and forking in would be way too powerful. You can also spend Artha on rolls. I think I mentioned Artha earlier, but each character has a certain number of fate, persona, and maybe deeds points. You get fate, you earn Artha at the end of a session, and I'll go over that shortly. In my campaigns, I'm pretty sure this is an optional rule that we use. It might just be a house rule, but we start with 2 fate and 1 persona. Fate can be used to open-end the 6s in a roll. So if you got 4 successes on the OB5 test, but you really want to succeed, and there's 2 6s, you can spend 1 fate to open-end all the 6s. And that might help you succeed. Rules as written, only the person who is rolling, the main person who's rolling who's doing the roll, can spend Artha. But my group has a house rule that if you are helping with the roll and you really care about it, you can also give Artha for the roll. And I like that because it's a little more cooperative flavor to the game. Persona, you can spend Persona. Oh, sorry. You can also use Fate to re-roll one failed dice. You can only spend a maximum of 2 Fate on a roll. You can spend Persona before you roll to gain extra dice, and that is up to a maximum of 3. And Artha dice does not count towards the obstacle. So if you have 4 dice on an obstacle 5 test and you really want to succeed, you can add 3 Artha to have higher chances of succeeding, but you will still get a challenging test because you're only rolling 4 skill dice. I hope that makes sense. You can spend Artha on any type of roll, health, steal, stats. You cannot fork into stat rolls if you like, and the stats are perception, will, power, fort, agility, and speed. Similar to D&D, those are what's used to make your skill exponent. You cannot fork into those. But if you're doing like a power test to break down a wall, the other characters can help you with power. And the advancement rules are the same, except for stats you never need routine tests. So you would, if you have an exponent 3 stat, you would need both 2 difficult and 1 challenging. So stats are a little bit different. But you should always track advancement for tests, is what I'm really going for. Because it's really hard to remember at the end of a session exactly what skills you rolled and how many dice you had for the test. You want to mark it down in the moment before you forget. Okay, that's Help and Artha. I mentioned Deeds points. They are very rare. You basically get them for saving the world, as long as you did it for a selfless reason. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and the book goes into more on that, but basically it should be a very rare thing for a player to get a Deeds point because they're very powerful. After the session is done, each player will go through one at a time and go through their beliefs and say, I think I succeeded in this goal, I think I should get a persona. Or I worked towards this goal and have more work to do, I think I should get a fate. And the GM will say, yes, I agree, or no, I disagree. You get a persona for succeeding in your beliefs. You get a fate for attempting the belief. Even if you failed, you still get a fate for attempting it. You can also get a fate for instincts. If that instinct makes your life more difficult. You can get fate for a trait that sends the story in an interesting or unforeseen direction. Something that I really like is that there's a humor fate. So if you do something funny or make a joke or something, and it's like over the top funny, not just regular funny, it has to be very funny to get the humor fate. And that's typically awarded like sometimes in the moment, sometimes at the end. But yeah, so that I'm trying to remember what all I said. I'm sorry. I recorded this video and there was an error halfway through the video, so I'm re-recording it. So my brain is a little bit tired. And I'm trying to remember what all I said. So, that's how you earn Fate and Persona. Deeds points, very rare. Yeah, okay. Campaigns will be... we're going back up to the campaign level. Campaigns will have arcs. And there's a mechanic in Burning Wheel called a trait vote. And my groups typically do them at the end of an arc because that's an easy way to remember to do a trait vote. I don't remember how often the book says to do a trait vote, but probably if an arc is really long and it'll be a while, you should do a trait vote in like the middle of it. Maybe between every 4 to 8 sessions is a good measurement, I think. So what a trait vote is each character will go through their list of traits, and then the other members of the group, the GM and the other players, will say, I don't think this trait fits your character. And then that will start a discussion. And I think rules as written, the person whose character it is doesn't get a say in it. But my group is a little bit more lenient, and if you're like, yeah, you're right, I haven't been playing into that trait, but I want to, my group will give that person a chance to keep that trait. It's basically, you're trying to see if the traits make sense for the character. So if there's 1 or 2 traits that don't make sense, like, I'm trying to think of a trait right now that, maybe your character has the obedient trait, but they've never really been super obedient. You might say, let's get rid of that. So you can get rid of traits. You can also add traits and say, I think your character has been very loyal. I think you should get the loyal trait. Typically, in my group, we start at character traits and then work our way up. So, I think loyal is a die trait. So we might find a synonym for loyal and say, if you keep doing these things, you will eventually get this die trait. Because die traits and call-ons are very powerful in the game. So we choose to start at character traits, typically. You don't have to do that. If you want to give a character a die trait or a call-on, go ahead. There's no judgment. There's nothing stopping you. They are just more powerful mechanics. During the trait vote, you can also decide on... There's 2 ways that players can earn Persona during a trait vote. And that is called... Well, technically... There's a couple. The most common are Workhorse and MVP. Workhorse is like someone who has been doing a lot of work over the arc. They're like always helping people, always offering to do roles. They're putting in the effort, and they would earn the Workhorse persona. MVP is someone who has been like crucial to the success of that arc or that length of time. Like their sorcery succeeded in the moment of need or something like that. There's also, you can earn the embodiment persona for really good and distinctive role playing. You can also get the Mold Breaker persona for really going beyond the bounds of the character. And if you get the Mold Breaker, you'll probably also maybe have a drastic change in your trait list. But Embodiment and Mold Breaker haven't come up as often as Workhorse and MVP. And just as like general trait vote rules, I don't know if this is a rule or just typical advice, but I would say maximum get rid of 2 traits and maximum give 2 traits. In my sessions, it's typically, if you need to, you get rid of 1 trait, and then we typically add 1 trait. Sometimes a character just has all the traits that they need, and that's totally fine. You don't have to earn a trait during the trait vote, but it is fun to earn one. And then that's all of the pieces I can think of that are specific to Burning Wheel for a session and for a campaign. You should be having fun. You should role play and you should find interesting ways to do things. You should ask stupid questions and make mistakes and just have fun. This is a game. You're meant to have fun. And just keep going through the campaign until you reach the end of it. And then when you reach the end, if you did have a big set in stone goal, like defeat the evil king, and then you defeat the evil king, you don't have to call it quits right there. You can do another session or 2 to wrap up all of the loose ends. But after that, start planning your next campaign. My group typically starts talking about the next campaign like a couple sessions ahead of time. Just so that players can start thinking of the next character they want to play. Yeah, so that's a synopsis on how to play Burning Wheel. I hope it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I would love to talk with you in the comments, or I can make a video talking about your comment if I think that would be more helpful. I have videos on character burning. I have another generic video on Burning Wheel. I've done the fight rules. I built Legolas in Burning Wheel using Burning Wheel life paths. I will probably do that for a couple more characters. Let me know what other topics for Burning Wheel you want me to talk about, or if there's other things you want to hear me talk about. I am busier nowadays because I have a full-time job and I'm trying to balance that with the social life and everything. But I do want to keep making videos. I enjoy talking with you all about Burning Wheel and about other random things. So yeah, let me know in the comments. Thank you, and I will talk to you later.